Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the surprisingly complex world of 18th century maritime wigcraft. Imagine yourself standing on the deck of a creaking wooden ship, the salty spray hitting your face, while above you, dark storm clouds gather ominously on the horizon. You're wearing a large, powdered wig, an essential status symbol of the era, and you're about to face nature's full fury while trying to keep this elaborate hairstyle intact. Spoiler alert: between scurvy, storms, and enemy cannon fire, maintaining proper hair fashion is probably the least of your survival concerns on an 18th century vessel. But hey, if you're going down with the ship, you might as well look fabulous doing it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from tonight, so drop your location and local time in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 1763, and you're standing on the quarterdeck of HMS Intrepid, a British naval vessel cutting through the choppy waters of the Atlantic. The salt-laden air clings to your skin as you adjust the massive horsehair creation sitting atop your head, your prized wig. It's not just any wig, mind you, but a carefully crafted status symbol that cost you nearly 3 months' wages. In the 18th century, these weren't optional fashion accessories, but essential markers of social standing, profession, and sometimes even political affiliation. As a midshipman in His Majesty's Royal Navy, your wig is modest compared to the captain's elaborate creation, but it still requires careful maintenance, especially at sea. The white powder dusting its surface is a mixture of fine flour and sometimes crushed alabaster, giving it that distinctive pale appearance so favored by Georgian society. One good rainstorm could transform this carefully constructed masterpiece into a soggy, paste-covered disaster draped unceremoniously over your ears. Maritime life in the 1700s presented unique challenges for wig wearers that their land-based counterparts never encountered. The constant humidity, salt spray, and unpredictable weather meant that sailors developed specialized techniques for wig preservation that remained unknown to most landlubbers. Historians still argue whether these maritime wig preservation methods were official naval protocol or improvised solutions passed from sailor to sailor. Your thoughts are interrupted as the bosun's whistle pierces the air. Storm clouds are building on the horizon, and you have precious little time to prepare. Unlike modern sailors with Gore-Tex and waterproof gear, you're about to face the elements with 18th century ingenuity as your only shield. The captain emerges from his cabin, his own magnificent wig perfectly arranged despite the building winds. How does he manage it? The secret lies in specialized maritime wigcraft techniques developed over decades of trial and error. The ship's barber, a crucial crew member whose responsibilities extended far beyond haircuts, is already assisting senior officers with their wig preparations. You notice younger sailors scurrying below deck with their more modest hairpieces, while the ship's master pulls something from his sea chest that that looks suspiciously like an oilskin bag. The meticulous care taken for these seemingly frivolous fashion items might seem absurd to modern sensibilities, but in the socially stratified world of 18th century seafaring, your wig was as much a part of your uniform as your coat and breeches. Better get that rat's nest covered before the heavens open, growls an old sailor passing by, pointing to your still exposed wig. Unless you fancy wearing a flower paste cap for the next fortnight. You smile at his jest, but you know he's right. Once ruined by rain, a wig required extensive reworking, and shipboard supplies for such repairs were limited at best. As the first fat raindrops begin to splatter on the deck, you reach for your own protection system, a solution born from centuries of maritime innovation and necessity. The fascinating world of nautical wig preservation was a complex dance of materials, techniques, and social customs that developed uniquely at sea. And as the storm closes in, you're grateful for the accumulated wisdom of generations of fashion-conscious sailors who came before you. The first crack of thunder rolls across the darkening sky as you hurry to implement your wig-saving strategies. On land, a gentleman might simply retreat indoors during inclement weather, but at sea, there's no escaping the elements. The ship is your entire world, and a downpour at sea presents an existential threat to your carefully maintained appearance. The nautical fashion crisis of wet wigs was a legitimate concern in an era when appearance directly correlated to authority and respect. You recall your first voyage as a young sailor, when you witnessed the aftermath of an unprepared lieutenant whose wig had been caught in a sudden squall. The once magnificent creation hung in limp, discolored strands, with white powder streaking down his face like ghostly tears. The crew's barely concealed snickers followed him for days until repairs could be made at the next port. In the strict hierarchy of naval life, such a loss of dignity could undermine a man's command authority, something you vowed would never happen to you. The materials comprising your wig make it particularly vulnerable to moisture. The horsehair foundation, or sometimes human hair for more expensive pieces, absorbs water readily. The powder applied daily is essentially wheat flour mixed with starches, and sometimes scented with lavender or other aromatics. When wet, this powder transforms into a paste that not only ruins the wig's appearance, but also creates a perfect environment for mold and mildew, especially in the warm, humid conditions of a ship sailing through tropical waters. You've heard tales of neglected wigs becoming so infested with fungus that they had to be thrown overboard, an expensive loss indeed. Weather's turning faster than a politician's promises, jokes the ship's carpenter as he passes, his own smaller wig already protected under a leather cap, cleverly designed with interior straps to hold the hairpiece in place without crushing its style. You nod in agreement while reaching for your own protection system. Practical maritime culture had always stood somewhat at odds with the impractical fashion demands of 18th century society. While admirals and captains might appear in portraits with elaborate cascading curls, the reality aboard ship was much more pragmatic. most working sailors opted for simpler styles that could be quickly protected or removed when necessary. Some maritime historians argue that practical concerns aboard ship actually influenced land fashion, gradually pushing society toward the simpler hairstyles that would emerge by the century's end. The particular problems of wig maintenance at sea sparked remarkable innovations. Unlike their land-based counterparts, who might carry collapsible umbrellas, a relatively new invention in the 18th century, sailors developed specialized protective gear exclusively for their headwear. These weren't just simple covers, but often ingenious designs that balanced protection with the need to maintain the wig's shape and style. You glance up at the quarterdeck, where the captain stands seemingly unconcerned about the approaching downpour. His confidence isn't merely bravado, it's supported by having the most sophisticated wig protection system on board. As the highest-ranking officer, he has access to the latest innovations in maritime fashion preservation, including specially treated leather caps lined with oiled silk that repel water while allowing the elaborate wig structure to remain intact. For ordinary sailors, the fashion crisis posed by rain required more creative solutions. Some ships maintained wig lockers, below deck specialized storage compartments designed to hold the crew's hairpieces during particularly severe weather. These small wooden boxes often featured ventilation holes to prevent the growth of mildew, along with hooks from which wigs could be suspended to maintain their shape. The investment in wig maintenance reflected more than vanity. In the rigidly hierarchical world of 18th century naval service, appearance was directly tied to discipline and order. Officers who couldn't maintain their proper appearance might be judged equally incapable of maintaining their command. Meanwhile, the elaborate wig-saving rituals that developed aboard ships created their own social bonds among crew members, with knowledge and techniques passed from experienced sailors to newcomers. As the rain begins to fall more heavily, you complete your preparations with practiced efficiency. The special techniques you've learned through years at sea will serve you well in the coming deluge. While landsmen might be at the mercy of the weather, you've mastered the art of navigating both the high seas and the equally treacherous waters of 18th century fashion expectations. The specialized materials and construction techniques used in maritime wigs distinguished them from their land-based counterparts in ways both subtle and significant. As you secure your protective gear, you appreciate the craftsmanship that went into creating a hairpiece specifically designed to withstand the rigors of sea life. Your wig wasn't purchased from just any wigmaker back in London or Portsmouth. Savvy sailors sought out specialized maritime wigmakers, craftsmen who understood the unique challenges of nautical life. These artisans developed distinct techniques that remain largely overlooked by mainstream fashion historians, who tend to focus on court and urban styles rather than practical adaptations for specific professions. Foundation of a seaworthy wig began with the selection of appropriate hair. While the finest land wigs might use human hair from European sources, maritime wigs often incorporated more resilient materials. Horsehair was particularly common, especially for everyday wigs, as it better withstood humidity without losing its shape. For officers who could afford them, wigs made from goat hair or even yak hair imported from the East Indies provided exceptional resilience against moisture. My cousin's wig was made from hair collected from the East India Company's Mongolian trading posts. The navigator tells you proudly, as he tucks his own hairpiece into a specially designed box. Cost him nearly a year's wages, but 5 years and 3 circumnavigations later, it still holds its shape better than the captain's New London purchase. The construction techniques themselves differed significantly from standard wig-making practices. While land wigs were typically built on a foundation of fine netting or silk galloon, maritime wigs often featured a base layer of leather or waxed canvas that provided additional water resistance. This foundation was then treated with various waterproofing substances, beeswax being a common choice, though more expensive wigs might use exotic gums and resins acquired through trade with indigenous peoples in the Americas or South Pacific. The integration of these materials required specialized knowledge. Knots and securing techniques used for maritime wigs were adaptations of sailors' own rope-working skills, creating stronger bonds between the hair and the foundation that wouldn't loosen when exposed to constant humidity. Some wigmakers serving naval clientele in major ports like Plymouth or Marseille were former sailors themselves, bringing their practical knowledge of materials and conditions to the craft. The powder used for maritime wigs also differed from standard compositions. While land wigs typically used simple wheat flour or starch, naval wigs often incorporated powders mixed with gum arabic or even fine clay particles that helped repel moisture. Some historical accounts suggest that sailors in the Far East trade sometimes used rice powder, which purportedly offered better humidity resistance than wheat-based alternatives. Scholarly debate continues about whether these adaptations were widespread or limited to specific naval traditions. My father sailed with Admiral Vernon in '39, an old bosun tells you, referring to the War of Jenkins' Ear. Said the Admiral's wig powder had crushed oyster shell mixed in, claimed it kept the dampness out, and added extra weight to keep it steady in high winds. Might be true, might be sailors' talk. Never could tell with the old man's stories. Beyond the wigs themselves, the accompanying accessories, designed specifically for maritime use, represented remarkable innovation. Specialized combs made from tortoiseshell or bone included built-in channels for applying protective oils. Portable wig forms, essentially collapsible hat blocks, allowed for overnight reshaping, even in cramped ship quarters. Some high-ranking officers even traveled with miniature heating tools that could be warmed over a lamp to dry out damp wigs in emergencies. The economics of maritime wigcraft created its own curious market. Port cities, with significant naval presence, developed specialized service industries catering to this need. In major harbors like Portsmouth, specialized shops offered maritime restorations. emergency services for weather-damaged wigs that promised 24-hour turnarounds for officers returning to duty. These establishments often employed techniques borrowed from shipwrights, using marine varnishes and waterproofing methods adapted from naval stores. As you secure your own wig in its protective covering, you appreciate the ingenuity that went into its creation. The seemingly frivolous fashion item represents a fascinating intersection of traditional craftsmanship with practical maritime innovation, a physical embodiment of how 18th century sailors adapted genteel society's expectations to the harsh realities of life at sea. The rain is falling steadily now as you secure your oilskin wig cap, perhaps the most important innovation in maritime wig protection. This seemingly simple item represents centuries of iterative design, refined through countless voyages and storms. The oilskin cap is to maritime wigcraft what the sextant is to navigation, an elegant solution to a persistent problem. True oilskin fabric treated with linseed oil and sometimes beeswax had been used for sailors' foul, weather gear, since at least the 15th century. However, the specialized adaptation of this material for wig protection emerged specifically in the early 1700s, coinciding with the golden age of elaborate wigs and expanding naval operations. The earliest reference appears in a 1723 supply list for HMS Dorsetshire, which includes oiled caps for the protection of officers' periwigs among its stores. Your own cap is a particularly fine example of the form, acquired in Gibraltar from a wigmaker who served the Mediterranean fleet. Unlike cruder versions used by lower-ranking sailors, this one features a dual-layer construction with linen oilskin exterior and a softer interior lining of silk treated with a proprietary mixture of beeswax and turpentine. The silk lining serves a crucial purpose. It prevents the oils from the protective outer layer from leaching into the wig itself, which would ruin both its appearance and the powder. French captains use kid leather caps instead of oilskin, the ship's doctor informs you as he adjusts his own protection. Supposedly more elegant, but they rot faster in tropical climates. English pragmatism wins again, I say. He taps his oilskin cap with satisfaction, this particular model featuring extended flaps that cover the long side curls of his physician's wig. The construction of these protective caps followed patterns nearly as complex as the wigs themselves. The better examples, like yours, were carefully tailored to the specific style of wig worn by the owner. Caps for full-bottomed wigs included special pouches for the side curls and queues, while those designed for shorter campaign wigs might incorporate drawstrings that could tighten around the hair to prevent shifting during rough weather. Most fascinating were the specialized closures designed to secure these caps in high winds. Simple ties worked for calm conditions, but experienced sailors often modified their caps with ingenious fastening systems. Some featured toggles carved from whale bone, while others used systems of hooks and eyes adapted from women's corsetry. the most sophisticated incorporated specialized chin straps with quick-release buckles that could be unfastened with one hand, essential if you needed to remove your protection quickly for an unexpected meeting with a superior officer. Lost my first commission because of a poorly secured wig cap, confides a lieutenant as you both take shelter under the quarterdeck. Called to report to the admiral during a squall. Couldn't get the blasted thing off fast enough. Appeared before him looking like I'd wrapped my head in a jellyfish. Never lived it down at the Admiralty. He gestures to his current cap, which sports an elaborate brass fastening system that resembles a miniature version of a ship's rigging block. The materials used in these caps varied by region and naval tradition. British sailors typically favored linen treated with linseed oil for its reliable water resistance and relative affordability. Spanish naval officers often used leather treated with olive oil and beeswax, a technique borrowed from Moorish tradition. Dutch maritime wig protection frequently incorporated rubber compounds sourced from their colonial holdings in South America, predating the widespread adoption of rubber waterproofing in general European fashion by several decades. Historians still argue about whether these national differences reflected practical adaptations to different sailing conditions or simply cultural preferences. For all their ingenuity, oilskin caps weren't perfect solutions. They tended to trap heat, making them uncomfortable in tropical climates. The earliest versions sometimes leaked at the seams, leading to disastrous results for the enclosed wigs. Like many aspects of maritime technology, they evolved through trial and error, with successful innovations quickly copied and improved upon. The marketplace for these specialized items reflected their importance. In major port cities, specialized shops sold nothing but maritime wig protection equipment, offering options ranging from basic oilskin bags for common sailors to elaborate custom-fitted caps for admirals and captains. Naval outfitters in London's Savile Row kept pattern books with measurements for officers' caps, allowing replacement orders to be sent ahead to ports of call. For longer voyages, ships often carried spare materials for repairs, and skilled sailors could earn extra pay by maintaining and mending their shipmates' wig protection gear. As you adjust your cap's fastenings, you silently thank the generations of fashion-conscious sailors whose accumulated wisdom is embodied in this seemingly simple object. Their ingenuity ensured that even in the midst of a raging tempest, you can maintain the dignity expected of your station, at least until you can get safely below deck. As the storm intensifies, you make your way carefully down the companionway stairs to the relative security of below deck. Here, in the cramped confines of the ship's interior, different wig preservation strategies come into play, ones that have evolved specifically for the unique environment found beneath a vessel's weather decks. The lower decks of an 18th century vessel present their own challenges for wig maintenance. While protected from direct rainfall, these spaces suffer from pervasive dampness, limited ventilation, and in tropical climates, stifling heat and humidity. The constant motion of the ship adds another complication, requiring storage solutions that can adapt to rolling seas and sudden lurches. Your destination is the small area near your berth where your personal sea chest is secured. Unlike the simple wooden boxes used by ordinary sailors, officers' sea chests often contained specialized compartments designed specifically for wig storage and maintenance. These wig lockers represent a fascinating intersection of furniture design and practical maritime necessity that developed uniquely aboard ships. Portuguese Navy captains have the most elaborate wig chests, the purser once told you. Saw one in Lisbon with 12 separate compartments, each lined with different materials for specific weather conditions. Cedar for humidity, flannel for cold, even one lined with copper for tropical climates, supposedly repels insects that would otherwise nest in the horsehair. Your own chest is more modest, but no less practical. Opening, it reveals a specially constructed interior box with a hinged, domed lid. Essentially, a miniature version of the wig stands used in land-based dressing rooms. This design allows you to remove your wig and cap together, placing them directly onto the stand without disturbing the carefully arranged curls. The stand itself is secured to the chest with a clever system of wooden brackets that prevent it from shifting during rough seas. The materials used in these storage systems were carefully chosen for their protective properties. The interior of your wig locker is lined with Spanish cedar, the same wood used for cigar boxes, which naturally repels moisture and insects. Small containers of camphor and lavender are strategically placed in corners of the chest, their aromatic properties helping to preserve the wig, while also masking the inevitable musty odors that develop in the close confines of shipboard life. My grandfather served under Cook, a midshipman tells you as he tends to his own, more modest wig nearby. Said they discovered the Pacific Islanders used oils from certain nuts that repelled moisture better than anything known in Europe. Brought back the secret, made a fortune selling the formula to wig makers in Portsmouth. Family's been living on the proceeds ever since. Whether the story is true or another tall maritime tale, you can't say. But the specialized preservative mixtures used aboard ships often did incorporate ingredients acquired through global exploration. The most sophisticated below-deck storage systems featured primitive climate control mechanisms. Some captains' cabins included small warming drawers positioned near the ship's galley chimney, where damp wigs could be gently dried without risking the heat damage that would occur from placing them too close to an open flame. Others used systems of sliding vents that could direct the limited airflow to help maintain optimal humidity levels around stored hairpieces. For longer voyages, particularly those crossing the equator or rounding Cape Horn, specialized wig preservation techniques became essential. Maritime wigcraft handbooks, small, privately printed volumes passed between officers, contained detailed instructions for seasonal restoration techniques. These included recipes for revitalizing powders made from ingredients available in ship stores and step-by-step procedures for restructuring wigs damaged by extreme conditions. The admiral's servant knows a trick with rum and egg whites, whispers the boatswain's mate as you both secure your wigs. When mixed with powder and applied after exposure to salt spray, it restores the stiffness better than any land method. Won't share the exact proportions, though guards that secret like it's the coordinates to a Spanish treasure fleet. The social dimensions of below-deck wig maintenance reflected the rigid hierarchy of naval life. Captains and senior officers might have personal servants dedicated partly or wholly to maintaining their wigs, while junior officers like yourself had to manage your own hairpieces or develop mutual assistance arrangements with messmates. Common sailors with simpler wigs often devised communal storage solutions with specially designated areas in their quarters protected from the worst of the ship's leaks and moisture. Scholarly research has uncovered evidence that these below-deck preservation techniques sometimes spread beyond maritime contexts. The diaries of several prominent 18th century wigmakers mention consulting with naval officers to learn specialized preservation methods, which were then adapted for the benefit of land-based clients traveling to humid colonial postings. This cross-pollination of knowledge represents an often overlooked aspect of how maritime innovation influenced broader society. As you carefully remove your protected wig and secure it in your chest, you note with satisfaction that your precautions have been successful despite the raging storm above. Your carefully constructed hairpiece remains dry and intact, ready to be restored to its proper place when the weather clears. The complex system of maritime wig preservation continues to serve its purpose, maintaining the delicate balance between practical necessity and the social demands of 18th century appearance. With your wig safely stored below, you take a moment to observe the fascinating social dynamics playing out around you as the storm continues. The elaborate system of wig maintenance aboard 18th century vessels wasn't merely a practical response to environmental challenges. It was deeply embedded in the rigid social hierarchy that defined naval life. The way sailors managed their wigs during adverse weather conditions revealed much about their rank, experience, and place in the maritime social order. The captain's cabin door remains closed, but you know exactly what's happening inside. As the highest-ranking officer, he has the luxury of a private space where his personal servant, sometimes a dedicated role known as a wigman, is likely attending to his hairpiece with meticulous care. The captain's wig will receive treatment with specialized preservatives available only to him, applied with tools that are forbidden to lower ranks. This level of hair maintenance isn't merely vanity, it's a physical manifestation of command authority. In the French Navy, they say Admiral de Grasse had a special wig made for storms. The ship's cook tells you quietly. Supposedly constructed with a core of hammered silver wire that held its shape, no matter how much rain fell on it. Cost more than a lieutenant's annual salary, but it never lost its form, even in a hurricane. Whether true, or yet another example of sailors' tendency toward exaggeration, the story reflects the importance attached to commanding officers maintaining their appearance under any circumstances. The officer's wardroom presents its own hierarchy of wig care. Post captains and commanders might have personal servants, while lieutenants like yourself must manage your own hairpieces or develop mutual assistance arrangements with messmates. The quality of your wig protection reflects your exact position in this hierarchy. Junior officers sometimes identified promising midshipmen by offering to share higher quality wig preservation techniques, an early form of mentorship expressed through fashion maintenance. One particularly fascinating aspect of maritime wig culture was how it created unexpected alliances across traditional social boundaries. The ship's barber, often a former sailor, who had learned additional skills, typically ranked with the other warrant officers, but wielded unusual influence because of his expertise. His knowledge of preservative mixtures and restructuring techniques made him an invaluable resource, even to officers who would otherwise never socialize with someone of his station. Old Matthews has been tending the Admiral's wigs for 20 years, notes a passing lieutenant. Started as a powder monkey, worked his way up through sheer skill with horsehair and powder. They say even the First Lord of the Admiralty consults him when his London wigmaker can't solve a problem. Strange world at sea. A man's worth is measured differently than on land. The social dynamics of wig maintenance extended beyond the officer class. Among ordinary sailors, simpler wigs or hair dressings still required protection, creating their own parallel system of techniques and knowledge. Experienced sailors passed down homemade solutions to new recruits, creating bonds that transcended formal rank structures. A seasoned, able seaman might take pride in showing a new shipmate how to fashion a simple protective cap from materials available in the ship's stores, a small but meaningful form of integration into maritime culture. Historians still argue about whether these social patterns around wig maintenance were formalized in naval regulations or emerged organically as practical responses to shipboard conditions. The limited surviving documentation suggests that while naval dress codes specified the types of wigs appropriate to different ranks, the methods for maintaining them remained largely in the realm of unofficial knowledge passed between generations of sailors. For officers serving in colonial stations, wig maintenance could become an unexpected avenue for cultural exchange. British officers stationed in India sometimes adapted local oils and preservatives for their hairpieces, while Spanish commanders in the Philippines incorporated indigenous waterproofing techniques. These exchanges represent early examples of cross-cultural adaptation that would eventually influence European fashion more broadly. My previous captain served 3 years on the China station, relates the sailing master as he checks the barometer. Came back with a technique for waterproofing wig bags using some kind of resin from Canton that outperformed anything available in England. Refused to share the secret with anyone below the rank of lieutenant. Took it to his grave after Trafalgar. This kind of specialized knowledge became currency in the social economy of naval service, with techniques and materials traded or hoarded based on personal alliances and ambitions. Perhaps most interesting was how wig maintenance created opportunities for social mobility within the rigid class structure of 18th century navies. Enlisted men who developed particular skill in hairpiece preservation could sometimes gain the notice and patronage of officers, opening paths to advancement that might otherwise have been closed. Naval memoirs occasionally mention servants who received promotions, at least partly, because of their ability to maintain an officer's appearance under difficult conditions, a small but significant crack in the otherwise rigid social boundaries of the era. As you settle into your berth while the storm rages above, you reflect on how something as seemingly frivolous as wig maintenance reveals the complex social machinery of life at sea. Every aspect of naval service, even fashion, reflects the elaborate hierarchy that keeps the ship functioning as both a military unit and a floating society with its own rules, traditions, and opportunities. As you rest in your berth, the rhythmic creaking of the ship's timbers provides a backdrop to your thoughts about the weather wisdom that informs maritime wig protection. The storm raging above deck is no surprise to experienced sailors who have developed remarkably sophisticated methods for predicting weather changes specifically to protect their personal appearance, alongside more obvious concerns of navigation and safety. Long before modern meteorology, sailors relied on a complex system of observable signs to anticipate approaching weather systems. This forecasting wasn't merely about sailing safety. It directly informed when and how to implement wig protection measures. An experienced sailor could read subtle changes in cloud formations, wind patterns, and even the behavior of seabirds to predict when it was time to secure their hairpieces. My first captain could smell rain coming a full day before the clouds appeared, an old quartermaster once told you. Said it changed the scent of the powder in his wig, claimed his hairpiece was a better barometer than any instrument. We laughed until we noticed he was never wrong. Strangest thing I've seen in 30 years at sea, and I once watched a dolphin steal a lieutenant's hat. The ship's log contains standardized entries for weather observations, but experienced sailors maintained their own informal records focused specifically on conditions affecting personal appearance. These wig logs represented a specialized form of meteorological knowledge that passed between generations of sailors through direct mentorship rather than formal documentation. They contained accumulated observations about how different weather conditions affected hairpieces, and which protective measures proved most effective in specific circumstances. Particularly valuable was the ability to distinguish between types of precipitation. A light mist required different wig protection than a driving rain or tropical downpour. Sailors in the North Atlantic developed especially nuanced vocabularies for describing different forms of moisture, with terms like Scotch mist, sea fret, and weather nose, indicating specific conditions that might affect a wig differently. In the Mediterranean, watch for the wigmaster's warning, advises the navigator, referring to a particular formation of cirrus clouds that local sailors had learned preceded rain by exactly 4 hours, just enough time to complete full wig protection procedures. In the Caribbean, it's the sudden drop in humidity before a storm makes the powder suddenly feel lighter on your scalp. Once you've felt it, you never mistake it. These weather prediction techniques weren't merely folklore, but represented sophisticated observational science developed through generations of practical experience. Maritime wig logs sometimes recorded barometric pressure alongside notes about hair maintenance, creating a parallel system of meteorological record keeping that has largely been overlooked by historians of science. The most experienced sailors developed regional expertise that proved invaluable when navigating unfamiliar waters. A midshipman who had served in the East Indies might recognize weather patterns that were unknown to sailors whose experience was limited to the Atlantic. This specialized knowledge became particularly important during the global conflicts of the 18th century, when naval vessels increasingly operated across multiple oceans and climate zones. The Spanish have a saying about Caribbean storms, relates a sailor who had been captured and later released by a Spanish vessel. When the frigate birds fly high, keep your wig dry. Noticed it myself during last year's Jamaica station. Those birds rise higher before a big blow, giving you good warning to get your hairpiece below deck. Instruments designed specifically for wig-related weather prediction represented a fascinating subset of maritime technology. Modified hygroscopes, simple devices measuring atmospheric moisture, became popular among officers concerned about their appearance. These wig meters often took the form of ornamental desk pieces in officers' quarters, with indicators that suggested when to implement different levels of hair protection. Some captains integrated wig preservation directly into ship operations. Historical accounts describe signals specifically relating to hairpiece protection, added to the standard flag communications between vessels. A British squadron operating in the monsoon-prone waters of the Indian Ocean in 1781 reportedly used a specific pennant configuration to signal secure wigs below deck, allowing coordinated response to approaching weather systems across multiple vessels. Historians still debate whether these specialized wig-related weather prediction methods contributed meaningfully to the broader development of meteorological science. The practical knowledge developed by sailors certainly included insights about atmospheric conditions and weather patterns that predated formal scientific understanding. However, because much of this knowledge remained in the realm of practical wisdom rather than documented observation, its full contribution to scientific advancement remains difficult to assess. The Admiral's standing orders include specific wig protocols for different weather conditions, notes the ship's clerk. Section 12, paragraph 4 specifies, upon observation of mare's tails extending from the southwest quadrant, Officers shall immediately implement full protection measures for dress wigs. Oddly specific, but I've never seen it fail as a predictor. As the storm continues above, you appreciate how the accumulated weather wisdom of generations of sailors helps preserve not just the ship and its cargo, but also the social order represented by properly maintained wigs. The specialized knowledge connecting meteorology to personal appearance represents yet another example of how maritime culture adapted the fashionable demands of 18th century society to the practical realities of life at sea. As the storm begins to subside, your thoughts turn to how wig protection methods varied across the vast colonial networks that 18th century sailors traversed. The global nature of maritime travel created fascinating regional variations in hairpiece preservation, with techniques adapting to dramatically different climate conditions from the Arctic to the equatorial zones. Naval vessels operating in the warm, humid climates of the Caribbean and South Pacific faced particularly challenging conditions for wig maintenance. European hairpieces designed for cooler climates often failed catastrophically when exposed to tropical downpours and stifling humidity. This environmental pressure drove rapid innovation among sailors stationed in these regions, resulting in preservation techniques that often incorporated indigenous knowledge and materials. First time my ship reached Barbados, my London wig lasted exactly 3 days before turning into a moldy disaster, confides a lieutenant who had served extensively in the West Indies. By the end of that commission, I'd learned to incorporate cassava starch in the powder and coconut oil in the dressing, techniques borrowed from local planters who'd already solved the problem through trial and error. The colonial port cities became laboratories for wig preservation innovation, with sailors exchanging knowledge in dockside establishments that catered specifically to maritime fashion concerns. In Kingston, Jamaica, several businesses specialized exclusively in tropical restoration of European wigs, advertising salvage services for gentlemen's rain-damaged hair. These establishments combined European wig-making traditions with techniques adapted from indigenous and African knowledge, creating hybrid methods that often proved superior to those developed in London or Paris. Archaeological evidence from colonial port cities occasionally yields fascinating artifacts related to this specialized industry. Excavations of an 18th century shop in Bridgetown, Barbados, uncovered specialized ceramic containers designed specifically for tropical wig powder storage, featuring double-walled construction with crushed charcoal between the layers to absorb humidity. Similar innovations appear throughout the colonial world, each adapting to specific local conditions. The Spanish in Manila developed an entirely different approach, explains the ship's naturalist, who had spent several years cataloging Pacific flora. They discovered that certain local resins, when properly prepared, created an almost invisible coating over the powdered wig that repelled water while maintaining the appearance of traditional powder. Supposedly derived from techniques used by indigenous peoples to waterproof ceremonial headdresses during monsoon seasons. In the northern colonies, different challenges required different solutions. Naval vessels operating in the fog-prone waters off Newfoundland and Nova Scotia dealt with persistent dampness rather than dramatic downpours. Sailors stationed in these regions developed wig bags lined with birch bark, a material borrowed from indigenous construction methods that naturally repelled the insidious moisture characteristic of North Atlantic conditions. Perhaps most remarkable were the adaptations developed for the extreme conditions faced during Arctic and Antarctic explorations. Wigs aboard vessels charting the Northwest Passage faced not just moisture, but freezing temperatures that could shatter brittle horsehair. Records from Cook's voyages mention specialized treatments using seal oils that maintained flexibility in extreme cold, techniques directly borrowed from Inuit clothing preparation methods. My uncle served on the Discovery with Captain Cook. A midshipman tells you as you both emerge on deck after the storm. Said they traded their standard wig bags for sealskin pouches obtained from natives in the South Pacific. Worked better than anything the Admiralty supplied, especially when ice formed on the rigging. The exchange of knowledge wasn't unidirectional. Indigenous peoples sometimes adopted and adapted European wigcraft techniques for their own purposes. Historical accounts describe Tahitian nobles incorporating elements of European wig construction into their own elaborate hairstyles, while maintaining their traditional coconut oil-based preservation methods that proved superior for local conditions. Colonial military outposts developed their own specialized adaptations. British forts in India maintained dedicated monsoon rooms for wig storage during the most challenging weather seasons. These climate-controlled spaces used sophisticated ventilation systems and desiccants like rice and local clays to maintain optimal conditions for hairpiece preservation during periods when outdoor wearing was impossible due to torrential rains. Historians still argue whether these colonial adaptations represented true innovation or merely practical necessity. What's clear is that they created a parallel tradition of maritime wigcraft that increasingly diverged from European practices as the century progressed. By the late 1700s, a sailor's approach to wig maintenance might reveal not just his rank, but his service history, whether he'd learned his techniques in the Caribbean, the Indian Ocean, or the traditional Atlantic routes. You can tell a China station man by how he wraps his queue, observes the bosun, referring to the long ponytail style that had replaced fuller wigs in many naval contexts by the century's end. They use a particular diagonal fold in the protective covering, picked it up from watching how local merchants protect their own hair during typhoon season. Works better than anything taught in Portsmouth. As you emerge fully onto the deck now that the storm has passed, you notice the captain already present, his wig impeccably restored despite the recent deluge. His years of service across multiple oceans have clearly taught him techniques for rapid restoration that remain unknown to less experienced officers. The global knowledge network of maritime wig preservation, built through colonial encounters and practical adaptations, continues to serve those who understand its sophisticated methods. As the ship returns to its normal rhythm following the storm, you notice several sailors emerging on deck without their customary wigs. This wasn't merely neglect of duty or fashion. It represented an important practical adaptation to maritime conditions that gradually influenced broader fashion trends. The story of how 18th century sailors managed their appearance during inclement weather isn't complete without examining the strategic alternatives to wigs that developed specifically in maritime contexts. By mid-century, many practical-minded sailors had begun questioning whether maintaining elaborate hairpieces at sea was worth the considerable effort. Alternative approaches emerged that provided similar social signaling while eliminating the vulnerability to moisture. These adaptations represent an important but often overlooked aspect of how maritime necessities gradually influenced broader fashion evolution. My first captain abandoned wigs entirely after losing 3 to a typhoon off Macau, relates the ship's surgeon as you both inspect minor damage from the recent storm. Had his own hair cropped short in a style that's becoming quite common among the more practical officers. Called it his stormproof solution, caused quite the scandal at first, but now half the lieutenants in the Pacific Squadron have followed suit. The cropped natural style short hair, dressed with simple oils, gained particular popularity among officers serving on extended voyages far from the wig maintenance infrastructure of major ports. This practical adaptation maintained a neat appearance while eliminating the need for elaborate protection systems during inclement weather. Historians still debate whether this maritime trend directly influenced the general move toward shorter, natural hairstyles that would characterize men's fashion by the early 19th century. For those unwilling to abandon wigs entirely, hybrid solutions emerged that combined the social signaling of traditional hairpieces with improved weather resistance. The sea wig, or campaign wig, represented a specialized adaptation featuring shorter, tighter curls requiring less powder and minimal maintenance. These streamlined designs could be quickly covered during sudden squalls and dried more efficiently when dampness was unavoidable. Admiral Nelson himself preferred the simpler style, notes the sailing master, referring to Britain's naval hero. Said a practical sailor had no business with 3 pounds of horsehair on his head when he needed to move quickly in battle or foul weather. Revolution in naval wigcraft, that was, when admirals started prioritizing function over fashion. Some officers embraced head coverings that eliminated the need for wigs entirely. The bicorn and tricorn hats increasingly served not just as accessories worn over wigs, but as complete alternatives to them. Specialized designs emerged that incorporated features previously associated with wigs directly into the hat construction. Padded interior structures that mimicked the silhouette of fashionable hairstyles while providing inherent weather protection. French officers pioneered the chapeau perruque, essentially a hat with built-in wig elements, explains a lieutenant who had spent time as a prisoner of war aboard French vessels. Clever design looked correct for formal occasions, but could be quickly secured in foul weather without any additional protection systems. By the time of their revolution, half their navy had adopted similar approaches. Among ordinary sailors, even simpler alternatives had always been common. The practice of wearing the natural hair in a tight queue ponytail, secured with tar-impregnated ribbon, the origin of the term tar for sailors, represented a weatherproof approach to appearance that required minimal maintenance. This practical style eventually influenced even officers' fashion, particularly on working vessels where function took precedence over formal appearance requirements. Archaeological evidence from shipwrecks occasionally yields fascinating insights into these alternative approaches. The recovery of specialized false queues, hairpieces, that could be quickly attached to natural short hair when appearances were necessary, suggests that sailors developed ingenious compromises between practicality and social expectations. These simple accessories could be quickly removed and stored during foul weather without the elaborate protection systems required for full wigs. My grandfather kept a collection of false queues for different occasions, shares an older midshipman from a naval family, had a simple tarred one for everyday duties, a more elaborate version for visiting foreign ports, and a full formal piece for Admiralty reviews. Claimed it saved him enough money and trouble to buy his first command. Practical man, my grandfather. Regional variations in wigless alternatives reflected differing maritime traditions. Mediterranean naval forces, particularly those of Venice and Naples, adopted cap-based alternatives earlier than Atlantic navies, perhaps reflecting the influence of Ottoman maritime traditions, where wigs had never gained the same foothold. By contrast, Baltic naval forces maintained more rigid adherence to wig requirements, even as practical alternatives emerged elsewhere. The economic implications of these alternatives were significant for both individual sailors and naval administrations. Wigs represented substantial investments. A good officer's wig might cost the equivalent of 2 months' wages, while maintenance supplies created ongoing expenses. Navies that embraced alternative approaches could redirect these resources toward operational needs, creating subtle but meaningful advantages during the global conflicts that dominated the century. The American rebels gained at least part of their naval advantage from practical approaches to such matters, observes the purser, responsible for the ship's financial management. Their continental navy allowed officers to forgo wigs from the beginning, saved them significant expense, while also eliminating a supply chain vulnerability. Hard to maintain Georgian fashion when your ports are blockaded, and wig powder can't be imported. As attitudes shifted over the century, the decision to wear natural hair or alternative styles increasingly reflected not just practical considerations, but philosophical and political positions. Officers influenced by Enlightenment thinking sometimes explicitly rejected wigs as artificial affectations, while those with more traditional viewpoints maintained them as symbols of proper order and hierarchy. Maritime fashion became an unexpected battleground for broader social debates. You can tell a progressive captain the moment he steps aboard, notes the master at arms with slight disapproval. Hair cropped short like a Roman bust, perhaps a simple ribbon at the neck. Old guard won't have it maintain their full rigs through hurricane and battle alike. Matter of principle now, not just fashion. As you adjust your own restored wig following the storm, you recognize that you stand at a crossroads of maritime fashion history. The elaborate protection systems developed over generations still serve their purpose, but the practical alternatives gaining popularity may represent the future. The evolution of sailors' approaches to hair in foul weather reflects not just changing fashion, but the endless maritime dance between tradition and innovation. As the sun breaks through the last remnants of storm clouds, casting golden light across the damp deck, you contemplate the broader significance of the specialized techniques that kept your wig dry through the downpour. The legacy of maritime wigcraft extends far beyond the practical concerns of 18th century sailors, influencing technological development, fashion evolution, and even modern waterproofing methods in ways rarely recognized by conventional history. The specialized waterproofing techniques developed for wig protection represented some of the earliest systematic approaches to creating water-resistant personal items. While traditional oilskins had existed for centuries, the precision required for protecting delicate hairpieces drove innovation in materials and application methods. Many techniques first developed for maritime wig protection would later find applications in broader contexts, from military equipment to civilian clothing. My brother left the sea to establish a waterproofing business in London, the carpenter tells you as you both inspect storm damage to the ship's boats. Applied exactly the same mixtures he'd used on officers' wig bags to ladies' shoes and gentlemen's document cases. Made a fortune during the rainy season of '59, couldn't keep up with orders from people who'd never set foot on a ship, but benefited from our solutions. Specialized containers developed for wig protection, with their carefully engineered ventilation systems and moisture barriers, prefigured more sophisticated approaches to environmental control that would later appear in scientific and medical contexts. The principles behind a good captain's wig chest, with its multiple protective layers and humidity regulation, contained the conceptual seeds of preservation techniques that museums would later adapt for delicate artifacts. Perhaps most significant was how maritime wig maintenance influenced broader fashion trends as the 18th century progressed. The practical difficulties of maintaining elaborate hairpieces at sea contributed to the gradual shift towards simpler, more natural hairstyles that would characterize the early 19th century. Naval officers returning from long voyages sometimes brought these practical approaches back to land society, where they gradually gained acceptance as legitimate alternatives to traditional wigs. Fashion always flows from practical necessity, if you look closely enough, observes the ship's doctor, who maintains a philosophical interest in social evolution. The elaborate systems we developed simply to keep horsehair dry during rainstorms ultimately helped topple the very fashion they were designed to preserve. Ironic, isn't it, The better we became at protecting wigs, the more obvious it became that simpler alternatives made more sense. Archaeological evidence occasionally provides tangible connections to this forgotten aspect of maritime material culture. Excavations of 18th century shipwrecks sometimes yield specialized wig maintenance items, combs designed specifically for repairing storm damage, collapsible forms for reshaping wet hairpieces, and containers bearing traces of preservative compounds. These humble artifacts tell a story of human ingenuity in the face of environmental challenges that transcends their seemingly frivolous purpose. The institutional knowledge developed by naval services regarding wig maintenance sometimes found unexpected applications in colonial contexts. British administrators in India adapted maritime preservation techniques to protect documents and textiles during monsoon seasons, while Spanish officials in the Philippines applied similar approaches to preserving religious artwork in humid cathedral environments. The practical wisdom of sailors contributed to preservation methods that protected cultural heritage in challenging climates worldwide. My cousin serves as archivist at the East India Company, notes the purser. Still uses document boxes lined with the same materials we use for wig storage at sea. Claims nothing better has been developed for protecting paper from tropical humidity. 2 centuries of maritime experience applied to preserving the company's records. The social practices surrounding maritime wig maintenance, the collaborative knowledge sharing, the specialized roles, the adaptation to diverse environments represent early examples of technical communities that would become increasingly important as industrialization progressed. The informal networks through which sailors exchanged preservation techniques prefigured later professional associations dedicated to specific technical challenges. As the 19th century approached and wigs gradually disappeared from common use, the specialized knowledge developed for their maritime protection might have vanished entirely. However, many techniques found new applications in related fields. Wigmakers who had served naval clientele often transitioned to creating theatrical hairpieces, bringing their knowledge of weather-resistant construction to the stage. Others applied their expertise to the emerging field of conservation, where techniques for protecting organic materials from environmental damage remained relevant. Last time we put in at Portsmouth, I visited an old wigmaker who'd served the fleet for 40 years, the sailing master tells you. Shops now devoted to ladies' hairpieces, but in the back room, he showed me instruments for wig maintenance that haven't changed since mid-century. Knowledge preserved through changing fashion, like a ship's design evolving while maintaining its essential purpose. The remnants of maritime wig culture persisted in naval traditions long after the hairpieces themselves disappeared from common use. Certain terminologies, storage practices, and even aspects of uniform regulations retained echoes of the elaborate systems once required for maintaining proper appearance during foul weather. These linguistic and procedural fossils provide fascinating glimpses into how practical solutions become embedded in institutional culture. As evening approaches and the ship settles into its post-storm routine, you find yourself appreciating the complex legacy of the seemingly simple act of keeping a wig dry during a downpour. The accumulated wisdom, specialized tools, and social practices developed for this purpose represent a minor but fascinating thread in the grand tapestry of maritime history, one that connects everyday concerns with broader technological and social evolution across centuries of seafaring tradition. Your wig, now restored to its proper place atop your head, carries with it this hidden history of innovation and adaptation. Perhaps someday the elaborate powder and horsehair constructions will seem as strange to future sailors as ancient Greek triremes seem to you. But the ingenuity that developed solutions to the practical problems they presented, the human creativity that finds ways to maintain social expectations even in the face of nature's challenges, will remain a constant in the ever-evolving story of life at sea. As our journey through the fascinating world of 18th century maritime wigcraft comes to close, let's ease into that gentle transition toward sleep. The rhythmic creaking of the ship's timbers has steadily continued throughout our tale, much like the consistent innovation of sailors facing practical challenges across centuries of seafaring. The solutions they developed, sometimes elegant, sometimes amusingly complex, remind us that human ingenuity flourishes even in the most unlikely contexts. As you drift toward slumber, imagine yourself standing on that wooden deck, the storm now past, feeling the gentle sway of the vessel beneath your feet. The elaborate wig sitting comfortably on your head represents not just a fashion statement, but generations of accumulated knowledge, a physical embodiment of how humanity adapts to challenging environments while maintaining our social connections and identities. The soft splash of waves against the hull grows more distant now, like the echoes of those 18th century innovations that still ripple subtly through our modern world. Perhaps tomorrow, when you notice a raincoat's waterproof seams or the moisture-resistant lining of a valuable container, you'll recognize the distant descendants of those solutions first developed to keep a sailor's wig dry during an Atlantic squall. Rest easy knowing that throughout human history, even our seemingly frivolous concerns have driven practical innovation, that the dialogue between necessity and ingenuity continues unbroken across centuries, connecting us to those powdered and wigged sailors who faced the same fundamental challenges of existence that we still navigate today. Their solutions, like their ships, have carried a precious cargo of knowledge forward through time to reach us here in this quiet moment of reflection and rest.